In London, this is The Economist. In this week's issue, we have our Business Books Quarterly, and one of the books we'll be reviewing is Leverage, the CEO's Guide to Corporate Culture by John R. Childress. Joining me to discuss it now is Adrian Wooldridge, our Schumpeter columnist and management editor. Adrian, what is corporate culture and why do people talk about it?
Well, it's easier to answer the second question than the first. People are talking about corporate culture all the time. They use it as a sort of all-purpose explanation of everything. Why did this merger fail? Because the two cultures of the two companies don't mix together very well. Why does one company succeed and another fail? It succeeds because it's got a good corporate culture, or it fails because it's got a toxic corporate culture. What we actually mean by corporate culture is very much more difficult to define. Sometimes people use the term to mean the overall company's brand, the image that it's trying to project to the rest of the world. Sometimes they use it to mean the formal culture that's laid down in mission statements or codes of conduct. Sometimes they use it to mean the sort of informal canteen culture of the company. I would prefer to use it in the most broad possible way. I think it's the company's DNA, the way people conduct themselves. And I think it's true. The personality of Virgin as a company is very different from the personality of McKinsey's. You know, companies do have these different ethoses, so there is truth in the term.
Now, I've just been looking at the blurb for the book on Amazon, and it promises that this book is designed to tell CEOs what culture is, where it comes from, and how to develop it in your company. That's quite a big promise. Does he keep it?
Well, not really. I think what it is it's a very good guide in the sense that it's a very good discussion of the literature, a very good overview. But one of the things that you rapidly discover when you look at this area is that it's a very big, amorphous area. It's almost as big as business itself. And there's no one way, there's no half a dozen ways of managing culture. He does say some quite interesting things which across all sorts of companies, I think. One is that when people hear this big word, culture, they tend to think that you must have a big cultural change program. You must have some big approach to changing your corporate culture if indeed you want to change it. And quite often you don't. Quite often it's the small things, the things that might seem almost insignificant, the way the boss conducts himself, the sort of whether he has a private plane or whether he has a private chauffeur-driven car that send big messages to the company. So it's often small changes in behaviour that can have big impacts on companies.
So it wouldn't be worth chief executives taking so much notice of it if it were not possible to change the culture. So is it possible for a new chief executive to come into a company that's not doing so well and change the culture and make it work? Because you think of a large corporation, it's very unlikely that the chief executive knows what goes on down in the divisions day to day, the way people speak among themselves, even among different levels of management. How can you change that?
Well, changing big organizations and the culture of big organizations is something that does take a lot of effort. I say it's partly big cultural change that you need to push through. It's partly a lot of symbolic changes that you need to do. The way the chief executive conducts himself, organizes himself, the sort of notion of the perks that he has in his job. One of the great sort of cultural changes that we've seen in this country is of the BBC, a huge national institution. And we have seen a concerted attempt over the last 10 years or more to change it from what it was, which was an extremely wasteful, rather inward-looking, self-indulgent organization, to one that's a bit nimbler, leaner and less wasteful. And we have a lot of mockery of John Birt, introducing Burt speak and consultant speech and trying to change the culture. And we had a lot of resistance from the BBC, but I think it's probably a better organized corporation than it was, and its culture is probably less wasteful, less self-indulgent than it was. Huge change. The other interesting thing is these companies that are emerging now, like Zappos being a classic example, which almost have a made-to-measure culture. It's almost as though they started off with the culture and the other things came on afterwards. So when they designed the company, Netflix is perhaps another example, they said, let's start with the culture and everything else will follow. JetBlue, I think, is an example. They said, there's lots of ways you could run an airline. Let's make sure we get the culture right, and then the other things can fit in. I haven't seen that sort of business model before, really.
Well, you had an interesting contrast there between companies that were set up in recent years from scratch, where they'd thought about the culture, getting that right first, versus the BBC, an institution from the 1920s that obviously from an era that predates the thinking about all of this thing. In an existing organisation, a big, long, established, entrenched organisation, do you think it needs a deep crisis of the sort that the BBC had, the taxpayers, the licence payers, MPs on its back saying we will not stand for the way things are run at the moment, a sort of a barbarians at the gate kind of threat? Does it take that to change a big, long-established organisation's
I would
culture?
say yes, definitely it does take a big crisis. Another big British institution which is suffering from a crisis at the moment is the police force, which I think is, again, something that's undermanaged, over-administered, over-bureaucratized, and is really driven by the police themselves for their own convenience rather than for the convenience of the public. Very, very hard to change.
And in Britain, every reform of the police force that's ever been announced that I can remember runs aground eventually, because they realise that having a culture change that starts from superintendent level upwards doesn't have any effect on the canteen culture. That it doesn't change the way officers among themselves speak, the way they see their duties, the way they see their incentives to get on, the things that stop them from doing things.
I mean, this is a particularly interesting example of the contrast between the formal culture of an organisation and the informal culture of an organisation. You can say as much as you want about the police force and people wearing smart uniforms and the CEOs and the upper management trying to reform things and coming out with great mission statements, but where the nature of the organisation is really decided is in the canteen culture, and it's where most reforms have fallen apart. You need to change the informal culture as much as you need to change the formal culture.
Adrian, thank you.
Thank you.
The Economist.